to Heart Collaborations, where we continue the Anxious Generation book study by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah, so today we're talking about part 2, which is about the decline of play-based childhood. And I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. One of the things I was thinking about is, kind of thinking back about your childhood experience and play. What was that like for you?
Well, you know, as I was reading this chapter, one thing that struck with me is that we used to go and all the neighborhood kids would play on our neighbors to the right. They had a big cherry tree, and our summers were kind of spent on that cherry tree. You know, where everybody would climb, everybody would be on different branches. We'd be eating cherries and just playing.
Were there any adults in that cherry tree with you?
No.
No adults. Okay, I was just curious. What about, were there any adults right under that cherry tree,
No,
like watching your every move?
nope. And actually, as I recall, we used to have some neighbors, these two boys that were brothers. And we would kind of take care of them because they were like the youngest. So everybody knew that, you know what, not that it was a rule, but everybody knew that, you know what, treat them nice because they're young.
Okay. All right. So you guys had established some norms.
Yeah.
Nice. When I think back about my childhood, I think of like a lot of activity, love being outside, and a lot of sweatiness too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because, they say that play is the child's work. And I think that's something that Jonathan Haidt really talks about as well.
I mean, we weren't making mud cakes, selling them to the neighborhood kids, as silly as that sounds. But we would have like a bike trail where where the kids would ride their bikes and then they would pick up a mud pie and everybody had their own little mud pies. So it was about 4 houses where the kids, we would all play together.
Nice. So a little entrepreneurship going on at an early age as well.
Yeah, with mud pies. I remember we'd pick up these little beady yellow flowers and decorate like the mud pies.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, one boy even ate a mud pie, so
awesome.
It was kind of fun.
All right. Jonathan Haidt talks about kind of the 5 fundamentals that need to take place in childhood. And one of the first ones that he talks about is slow growth. And I appreciated that. He talks about how, as humans, the first 2 years are really fast in terms of development. And then it slows down for about 7 to 10 years. And then at puberty, speeds up again. And then after a couple of years, kind of comes to a halt. And he made a comparison that when you're looking at many other animals, he specifically talked about the chimpanzees, that it's just kind of a constant same rate of growth. And one of the things he talked about is how the reason that we have that slowdown period for that 7 to 10 years is because there's a lot of social learning that's taking place.
Yeah.
So it's real fast developmentally, physically, and then a slowed down period where we're really learning a lot of things socially.
Yeah, I was thinking about those grades, and I was thinking, wow, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th are so important. Like, I was thinking about that because when I used to babysit, I remember this little girl that she was just a clown. And she would put anything, like, in her mouth or up her nose, And I just thought, wow, she was really curious about, different things. But I remember one day she was like, got in trouble for having a fist and then asking kids, well, do you bet if I could put my fist in my mouth or not? And she was betting them a quarter at school.
Right.
I remember my friend calling me and saying, hey, I don't know if she should be in trouble or not because she really earned the money fairly. Like, she said, but it's not the right thing to do. She goes, because she knows she can put that whole fist in her mouth, So it was really funny. And I remember she was a 3rd grader, and I was thinking, she's a really curious kid.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And, sometimes that curiosity can get kids in precarious situations or make them a little more prone to correction, that sort of thing. But as adults, parents and adults and educators and people in the community, we really want to honor that curiosity as much as we can, right?
Yeah.
Because we want it to just foster and grow and bloom. For sure.
Yeah, and so part of that is like that free play of making up your own rules, and just making sure that when we make up those own rules, it's kind of like we need to be nice to those younger kids that were coming and playing.
And maybe you didn't. Maybe everybody in the group might not have known, but there were some other people in the group that set some limits or boundaries or taught them or
Yeah.
mentored to them, right?
Yeah, because when we gathered to play on that cherry tree, I must have been 11 or 12, but I remember there were some teenagers there too. So there were older kids than me and younger kids than me, some kids my age, and we just all played together.
So mixed ages.
Mixed ages, everybody on the cherry tree. Everybody was always eating on the cherry tree. We had peach trees, so sometimes, we'd go to my house or sometimes, but we were mainly on the cherry tree because it was so big.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that during that discussion of free play, Jonathan talks about the importance of outdoors and how important that is for our development.
Well, I remember, taking a risk. Like, no one really thought about taking a risk, but we were all up on the branches, and I remember one day when this one kid fell, and it was like nothing. Somebody else came and picked him up and, like, wiped off the scratches, and he was just fine. He was like, oh, but when he got home, he got in trouble. So it's kind of like, but, there were some risks that we were taking about playing on that tree, and no one
Right.
even thought twice about it, really.
I've got a couple of memories, and one stands out in particular. And on my street, it kind of slanted up to get to the corner, right? So a little bit of hill. Seemed like a big hill as a little kid, but when I go back, it's just a really small slant almost. But all the bigger kids were riding down that hill without hands, right? Right? So I, work really hard to get to the top of that hill and then try to go down without hands. And wow, that handlebar just yanked around, threw me over the top of the handlebar and, landed, had some scratches and that sort of thing, cried a little bit. But guess what? Next thing you know, who's going back down again, trying, without hands, right? And
Yeah.
and it was me. And I think that, some degree of risk is really important. It teaches us resiliency. It teaches us
yeah.
that everything cannot go right. We can even get hurt physically, but yet, wow, we
Yeah.
can get some attention possibly if it's needed, some support from the group, and then regroup, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the puppy that we just got, little Astro.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about how he really loves to play, but we have an older dog that is like, if he gets anywhere near him, he growls at him. He does not want to play with him. So, even that little puppy is learning, what? He doesn't go near the older dog anymore. He kind of just is curious about him and will look at him and sometimes paw him, but he doesn't really initiate play with him anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
So he learned that norm right away.
Right.
So imagine what our kids are learning, how to treat others, and, just with free play and managing their own skills.
And they're
So-
learning it from others, other peers, same age, younger and older, without
Yeah.
that adult supervision. And so the importance of free play
So
without
important.
the adult, orchestrating it, right?
Yes. Sometimes I feel like as a parent, we want to protect, and I can remember my own son trying to get him to walk and holding him by the hands and, going outside on the sidewalks, making sure he can walk or, and I thought, when is this kid going to walk? So he'd get up and sit back down. And finally one day he just got up and walked, but it was all like looking at others walking. So I take him to other toddlers to see, hey, they're walking, and finally he just got up and walked.
Yeah. I was telling my spouse, we were talking about this, and we were talking about one particular day when we had our son at Sonic. And, he was younger. He was probably 3, something like that. And they were playing in the sand at this particular one, and a older kid came up, and my son had some kind of truck or something like that. And I'm watching from a distance, and the older kid just goes to grab that truck, right? And kind of grabs it, pulls it to him. And my natural instinct was to get up and go over and go give him his truck back. You're older, bigger, all those kinds of things. But somehow I managed to resist and paused and waited, right? Uh-huh. And I got a thrill because my son reached to that kid's chest and jerked that truck back, right? And so I was elated because I'm like, wow, okay, cool. He got a real world experience where he had an obstacle, somebody older, somebody bigger, grabbing something that was his, but yet he handled it on his own. And so that was providing feedback for him that he could take care of himself in the world.
Yeah.
And when I was sharing that with my spouse was like, okay, if you share that story, but what if that hadn't gone like that? What if the kid had then pushed him down and he started crying, And we were thinking about that, and I was like, okay, but there's a lesson there too, right?
Yeah.
There's a lesson there that if he got pushed and fell and started crying, that somebody would come, and give him support, and that then he would regroup and go about his business, right?
Yeah.
So, as parents, we want to intervene, but
It's hard.
a big message here is that we need to allow some developmental things to take place socially within groups, for sure, in childhood.
Yes.
So another factor that Jonathan Haidt talks about is attunement. And, I can't help but, okay, so first of all, attunement is, the developmental skill that takes place, the learning that takes place where we match emotions, where we match movement, where there's some synchrony there. And, I love to think about that because everybody has been involved with some little baby where you smile real big or you laugh, and then that baby mimics that, right? And that's learning taking place. It's a lot of fun, but it's also learning taking place. They're matching our emotions, they're matching our movements, and kids love to play silly games. Maybe they're clap games, maybe they're songs where they're matching, right?
Yeah. That reminded me of like the peekaboo game.
Yeah.
When my daughter was little, it was so funny because it was hard to get a giggle out of her.
Oh, really? Okay.
But when you played peekaboo, she became real curious to see where you were. And so that was fun. But that's what it reminded me of when I read that chapter or that part of attunement was her finally giggling and laughing, playing the peekaboo game.
Now, one thing that I thought was a great statistic that Jonathan Haidt brought out in Anxious Generation was that 17% of parents say that when they're playing or spending time with their children, that they're distracted. Distracted oftentimes by something digital. Maybe it's a smartphone. Then I think it was 52% said that they were sometimes distracted. That's something really for us to pause and think about because that attunement is so important in development, and it's going to be something that either builds where they have emotional resiliency and emotional regulation, or they don't have those skills. So parents, we need to pause and we need to think about that as we're spending time with our kids. And we oftentimes, two people working in the home or one person at home and having to work. And so oftentimes that time is limited. And so maybe we need to turn off the phone and set it aside and really be purposeful in that time with our kid. And I totally get the demands and the pull.
Yes.
But I think the more purposeful we are, then the better that we're going to do.
Yeah. I was just thinking about a car ride.
Okay.
Sometimes children are entertained in a car with mobile devices.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, what a perfect time to really talk to your kids. Because one, you have the childproof locks on, they can't escape the room,
Right.
and so you can bring up any topic you'd like
Mm-hmm.
and have a discussion,
Right.
but I think we're missing a lot of those like opportunities when we're in the car as well of, just having them be entertained
Mm-hmm. True.
instead of learning to navigate and look outside and see what they see,
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, just um, being curious and doing that, but and that explains to me about the social learning too is like if they can't carry a conversation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's going to be really hard for them because they learn all their social learning, let's say elementary, right? Those are such important years. It gets them ready for middle school.
Right.
Imagine going to middle school and not being able to carry on conversations, know the unspoken norms, or the rules of play.
Right. Right.
That is really hard. I feel like that 7th, 8th grade are so important that the social learning skills that are learning in elementary, are taken in because I feel like those kids are the ones that get picked on, because they,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of kids want to
Lacking in
see.
some skills and
Yeah.
right, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then, but we're losing a lot of kids to the virtual world.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening is that they're not learning those skills and then they get into this other world. And let's say the real world, in today versus the virtual world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a lot of children that need to experience real world.
Right.
And just remember, if they are in the virtual world, even though they're talking to friends, laughing, then that takes away an opportunity from them into truly interacting and playing with somebody in real life.
Right. And one other thing that comes to mind for me as far as in socialization and social learning, oftentimes the parent is very pivotal in that the parent is sort of vetting. The parent is vetting the friends. Is this
Yes.
a kid that I want my kid to hang out with? The parent is vetting other parents and other adults. And we're pretty conscientious about that in the real world, right? I mean, we're actually vetting them. But in the virtual world, that's not happening,
Right.
and it's very tough to happen, right? And so I think that's something else that we need to think about, the importance of, choosing who your child hangs out with, spends time with, learns from, emulates, and what are you able to do when it comes to the virtual world? And are you willing to relinquish that parent responsibility?
Yeah, that's really hard because in the virtual world, you don't know who really is Sam behind the username, right? We don't know if it's a grown up, we don't know if it's a young adult or a child. All we can trust is that if my 10-year-old is playing, that is a 10-year-old.
And yet,
But we
that
don't
would be
know.
foolish to really trust that, right?
Yes.
For sure. Jonathan Haidt talks about a couple of different things. He talks about conformist bias, and he talks about prestige bias. And I'm curious what your thoughts were surrounding those topics.
It's really hard with that peer pressure.
Mm-hmm.
We want to conform to society and what's going on. We want to make sure that our kids don't get left out. I think that's, a big thing for kids is that if my daughter's friends all have an iPhone and she's the only one without an iPhone, do we conform and get her an iPhone? Or does she stay with her flip phone? And so that is a big question about to what point, do we conform or stay?
And Jonathan Haidt talks about how conformity bias is, a part of that social learning, right? And in the real world, it happens in a group where that group is establishing norms. That group
Right.
is establishing how do you get entry into the group, how do you exit from the group, and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Whereas in the virtual world, it's a totally different set of norms, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's very easy to enter a group. There's often no prerequisite to behavior, and it's very easy to exit that group. And so,
Uh,
go
you
ahead.
know, yeah, it is really easy to exit because that's what a lot of some students have a hard time, when they get blocked. So it's kind of like learning how to navigate that, right?
Right.
Especially as young people trying to see where that lands.
Yeah, it's hard when it's done to you, but it's also a part of a new type of social dance where if I am irritated, if my feelings are hurt, I don't have to work at reconciliation. I don't have to work at expressing my feelings. I don't have to let the person know they hurt my feelings and how and set some boundaries. I just exit. Well, in the real
Yeah.
world, I don't know about you guys, but I need a lot of grace in life. I thank goodness I have a lot of good friends that show me a lot of grace, right? And when I screw up, they oftentimes will let me know I screwed up. And then I get a chance to apologize or to give understanding, all those kinds of things.
Right.
And so that's a skill that's very important to me. And can you imagine a world, and this is kind of where we're growing to. Can you imagine a world where there's no grace hardly, where you just block, you just don't like, you just exit the group,
Well, and that's going to become the norm with lots of our kids. All they do is text. They don't call each other up and ask, okay, why did you do this or what happened? All they do is block.
So some
Yeah.
important skills missing, right? And then prestige bias was another term that Jonathan Haidt talks about. And, in the real world, we elevate and we think highly of people who have some type of demonstrated skill or characteristic. Maybe they're a great leader, and so we look up to them. Maybe, for example, in Boy Scouts, I guess now it's Scouts, right? So you work your way up the leadership ladder by demonstrating these different skills. If you're an athlete, other kids look up to you because of you're a great dribbler. You're a great shooter. You have some skill that merits being looked up to. And with prestige bias in the virtual world, it's about how many likes you have. So you kind of gain status based on popularity, right? How many likes you have, how many followers you have, those kinds of things.
Well, and even in a game, that very popular game, if they have so many skins, they're top ranked and they've got that prestige.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then Jonathan Haidt also talks about the expectant brains and sensitive periods or critical periods. And really what that's talking about is, for example, in some animals, for example, we'll use the geese. There's a very critical period where this learning takes place in a very small amount of time. And it either takes place or doesn't take place. And we all kind of have probably, if you've gone to college, been exposed to how there was the one situation where geese, there was a man who had the big black boots, and they were evidently very close to the geese when the geese were born. And there's a critical period with geese where they imprint, and once whatever they imprint on, they will follow that, right? And so there are numerous pictures out there that a lot of you will have seen, where the geese are following this man with big black boots, and wherever he goes, there's a trail of geese behind them because they imprinted. And so there are also some critical periods for us, and he uses the word sensitive periods. One is language acquisition, and usually for like other language acquisition other than your primary language, usually prior to 12. Then you will have a pretty good opportunity to be pretty fluid, and a native speaker not necessarily detect an accent, But for the most part, after 12, then they often will wonder or even ask, where are you from, right? And of course, there are exceptions to that, but that does seem to be a critical period. Another critical period. Oh, I love this particular study where Jonathan Haidt talks about how Japanese businessmen that moved to California for a period of time, if their kids were younger than 14 or 15, and then they moved back to Japan after that, oftentimes they identified as American. And so that's how they saw themselves. They
Yeah.
felt American. But if they moved back earlier than that, then they identified as Japanese, right? So
Yeah.
I think that
That was
there
really
are
cool.
some sensitive periods where some learning needs to take place, or some social experiences need to take place during that period of time. So what happens when social media is the teacher, right?
We learn all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
There's no telling what your child will learn on social media.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we've seen, the study of where maybe 16, maybe even higher, for for young people to actually, get on the apps, and because of that comparison,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
but to the being of left out, and so
Yeah, and I think that we just have to be real world, and sometimes it's even hard to discuss. But the internet is about the adult world, and kids are entering that. First of all, Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about how 13 is just way too young to be able to establish an account, and in that world, you only have to be 13 to be able to open accounts without parent permission. And we know that there's really no effective use of really verifying age, those kinds of things. And so the types of things that our kids have access to, and it can be anything from, they've talked about the explosion really of explicit photos, sexual abuse, pornography. And so it is very important that we do be diligent, and we have to talk about the rawness of the internet.
yeah, I think it's an important factor to bring out, especially, with teenagers having two Instagram accounts, one that they share with their parents, one that they share with friends, and just knowing that they don't have to hide that kind of stuff, that they can go and talk to their parents about things going on. I feel like being a little bit more open, especially with this new generation, providing a safe space so that they can come in and talk to you.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Let us know if something has concerned them.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, here when we have unsupervised play, I feel like our kids are very creative. They can build forts. They can build. They can go play, like I was talking about, in that cherry tree.
Yeah.
But when it's in the virtual world, I know my daughter gets on Roblox quite a bit, and sometimes I get on Roblox too and play, but it's really hard to tell whether that's a young person or an older person. Like, you have no idea, and just trying to keep them. Well, I try to vet what's going on and who's playing what game,
Right.
but I'm not a detective, and it makes it really hard to
Yeah.
to know who's behind that virtual name. So I think it's important to know what where our children are getting on in the internet. What parts of the internet are they in?
Yeah,
So.
and one of the kind of results of why kids spend so much time in the digital world is because as a Western society, we decided it was too risky it was too dangerous
Mm-hmm.
to be outside unsupervised. And so, what are the kids' choices? If they can't be outside, mom's got to clean the kitchen, all those kinds of things, right?
Well, it's really hard with trying to monitor everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we overprotect,
Mm-hmm.
right? So here we are overprotecting in real life, but in the virtual world, we're not protecting at all,
Right.
or we think we're protecting, but I know,
It's limited, right?
yeah,
Mhm.
very limited, yeah.
Mhm.
So, you know, so he also talks about like the mindset of discover mode and defend mode,
Mm-hmm.
and when we talk about discover mode, I'm thinking about, you know, when I send my daughter into, to go pay with her friend,
Mm-hmm.
her friend came with
Right.
her. And I said, why don't y'all go order whatever y'all want?
Mhm.
And I sat on the bench and they went and ordered and they were like, and she said, I did it. And she came back and they got their food, she came back, but she was kind of scared to go up there, but her friend was not.
Mm-hmm.
Her friend does a lot of things for herself. So it was
Okay.
funny that I was
Uh-huh.
like, okay. And she goes, we got this, let's go.
I
So
love that.
they went,
Uh-huh.
so just thinking about,
And what a great role model to see another friend, being really confident and successful.
yeah.
And you're kind of like, well, if she can do it, I can do it, right?
Mhm. Yeah. So it's just giving those opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
where we want to protect, and it's really hard. I was trying to think of a discovery mode for myself, but I'm too old. I can't really. Besides riding my bike.
Yeah.
And
So Jonathan Haidt talks about two different types of mindsets.
yeah.
One is a discovery, mode,
Yeah.
and one is a defend mode. And I liked his example of discovery was like a kid in a candy shop
Uh-huh.
where there's an excitement, right? There's a curiosity, there's an
Yeah.
exploration. They're just looking around, trying out all the candy and figuring out what they want to go for next, right?
Uh-huh.
So it's a green light world, right?
Yeah.
And on the defend mode, then there's a scarcity mindset, and there's less adventure and curiosity because you're too afraid to be too curious, right?
I'm gonna go grab a tissue. I'll be right back.
Okay, all right. And so Anita's been having a little allergy issues, and yeah, it's
I'm
that
back.
time of year, right?
Yes.
So discovery mode, more thinking for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and with defend mode, you're sort of afraid to be independent and to think on your own.
Well, I think about a young person that I know
Uh-huh.
where the mother has always been there, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But two, I feel like some of the opportunities were taken away,
Mm-hmm.
and now she has a hard time today as an adult. She has a hard time doing some of the things that she should be doing on her own by herself.
Mm-hmm.
She relies on mom. She calls mom all the time. Can you help me with this? And I think to myself, what happened?
Mm-hmm. That there's kind of a timidness, kind of a
Yeah, like
fearfulness.
well, I'm gonna say even like a confidence level. Like
Okay.
I feel like confidence also goes into play with this, as when we give our children part to discover, we give them that confidence. Like we know you can do it,
Right. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But then in defend mode, we're kind of scared,
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of are thinking we're in this box, and you have to stay within this box.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no curiosity, I feel like there's no confidence being built,
Right.
because not that something's being done, but a lot of limits
Mm-hmm.
is what I'm thinking about.
I can remember Jonathan Haidt, I think it's early on, he talks about how parents are to be a kind of a safe base, right? Where the child can wander from that safe base, but if, there is something going on, that they can go back to that safe base, get reassurance, confidence, and then sent back out, right? On
Right.
their way to explore and those kinds of things. And so as parents, we want to be, when they're younger, we want to be that safe base. And as we continue to let them explore and grow, then eventually they're going to become their own safe base.
Right.
And that's what we want. We want kids that are able to become their own safe base.
And that they can navigate
Yeah.
their own.
One of the stories, and I love this one. This was like one of my favorites. But Jonathan Haidt shares a story about the Biosphere 2, and I think it took place in Arizona, if I remember right. But it was an environment where they were trying to be self-contained, and so trees grown, all those kinds of things were in this limited environment, and so the trees there, they didn't experience the natural rains, the natural winds,
Oh, yeah.
all those kinds of things, right? And what they found is that eventually the trees fell under their own weight. I want you to hear
Yeah.
that, under their own weight, right?
Yeah.
And it was because they weren't exposed to those natural elements, the wind, the storms, the rains, those kinds of things. And there's a lesson for us in that our kids need to experience, as hard as it is, some of those wrecks on the bicycle, some of those rejections from a friend, all those kinds of things. They need to experience some of those natural things so that they can see that they're able to persevere, that they're able to problem solve, that they're able to depend on their group, all those kinds of things. And I thought that was a great, model for that.
No, I really like that with, the children learning how to manage themselves and navigate.
Right, right.
Yeah.
In addition, Jonathan Haidt talks about, in chapter 4, he talks about puberty and the block transition to adulthood. And he lists some specific blocks. So in other words, things that are blocking our kids from progressing to adulthood. And we're seeing that all over the world,
We
right? Right. I'm curious, and of course, don't feel like you have to share. But does anything come to mind for you personally that either you've experienced in your own life, your own family, or you've noticed in others in the neighborhood, the tribe, where you see some blocks to adulthood?
Yes, I can see some blocks with some of the kids, especially Gen Z. I hate to bring that up, but a lot of them are having a really tough time with maturing. I'm going to say adulting because
Okay.
they are the ones that I know are 18 and above, and they're having a hard time navigating life. Just college, work. It's like they lack like being told, kind of someone else navigating them.
Okay.
So I feel like most of them are playing games, and now that they're a little older, they're having a tough time navigating that. So yeah.
One of the things that Jonathan talks about as far as blocking a block is, and we've touched on it already a little bit, about safetyism, about how we're not letting our kids, explore the world, experience the world, because we've decided it's unsafe. And, you have to think about prior to the information age, probably as a humanity, we are very much as we have always been. There are times when there are safety concerns. There are times, but possibly our view has also been skewed because we didn't necessarily know what was happening in the next county or the next state or across the nation. And now, for example, and it's a great thing, and I'm so thankful that it exists. But the Amber Alert, driving down the highway,
Oh yeah.
we're very aware if there's, a missing person, and it could be a senior citizen, it could be a child, it could be whoever. But because of that Amber Alert, you're driving down the highway and you become aware of it. Whereas, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so we're so much more aware every time a negative thing, a bad thing, a harmful thing happens, right?
Yeah.
For even think about sharks, okay? You know, you go to the beach during the summer, and you've probably seen how many news stories about shark attacks. And so, what are you? You're afraid to get out in the water, right? So,
It's like watching Jaws before summer.
yeah,
You don't want to get in that water,
exactly,
right?
exactly. And then smartphones, just the constant use and overexposure of smartphones, and inappropriate exposures, lack of real world experience because of the amount of time we're spending on our phones. So that's another block. Um, Lack of rites of passage. What'd you think about that part?
Well, I just thought about that as it's so important that the rites of passage, because it also sets like a norm,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like if you think about it, and you had a rite of passage,
Mm-hmm.
and what was it, and I think about when I was 16,
Mm-hmm.
that I had my my little surprise birthday party
Uh-huh.
or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and I think about, you know, at 16,
Mm-hmm.
you're experiencing, that rite of passage of
So there was a bigger deal made out of that particular birthday than some of the others,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
and so it's kind of like, okay, so I now was just thinking back, what are the rites of passages that we're passing down,
Mm-hmm.
to our own
Right.
kids?
Right. Right.
So,
I can think about, speaking of 16, when I was growing up, everybody was anticipating, being 16. It was such a huge, big deal. You were going to go get your driver's
yeah,
license,
for the
right?
driver car, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it was the norm. It wasn't the exception, it was the norm. Probably the only times that that wasn't happening is maybe if there was a financial barrier, where, a family wasn't able to afford insurance or something like that. But otherwise, you were getting your license.
Yeah, and you were in driver's ed. I remember
Yeah.
everyone took driver's ed.
Right,
And
right.
that was really exciting.
And today, there's been a huge, huge decline in the number of kids that are going to get their license, period. There's so many kids that are, 18 and still don't have their license. And, but yet that's a rite of passage that we've experienced in the past, right?
Yeah.
What are some other rites of passage that you can think of?
I guess maybe high school graduation and,
Yeah, definitely.
getting ready to move out of the house, going to a dorm.
Getting
that
your
I
first
feel like-
job, right?
Yeah, getting your first job. Because, I think a lot of the rites of passage, especially for like 18-year-olds to move into a world, an unknown world, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're already having all this stuff going on, and then to pile it on top,
Mm-hmm.
it's just kind of like, opening maybe some other doors to create more opportunities, so that they, for example, like getting the kid in the kitchen, teaching him how to cook.
Right, right.
He's gonna be driving, he can learn how to cook.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe being responsible around the house and giving them those opportunities, so that when they turn 18, they have the confidence of, oh, I can get my own apartment,
Right,
or,
right.
or I know how to live.
Yeah, I got to tell you, when you were talking about the kid in the kitchen, from a very early age, I'm talking as soon as my son could stand, basically. I like communal things, right? So I had him in the kitchen. We'd be making cookies or whatever, and he's standing on the chair so he can reach the items. But the benefit I get now is if he's at home, if he comes to visit, and I'm in the kitchen, then he's in the kitchen with me. We got the music playing, we're dancing, we're singing, we're cooking together, and I love that. So parents, open up those opportunities to let your kid participate. It makes it so much more fun for you as well.
Well, you establish a norm,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's cool.
And then I guess kind of to end it, Jonathan Haidt talks about building a ladder to adulthood. And, he goes through kind of some ages that he's putting out there that families might think about at certain ages to do certain kinds of things. I remember one of the ages was 6. At 6, let your child begin to participate in chores around the house and taking responsibility and contributing to the family. That, the first time they get to set the table is a big deal, right? Now, maybe the 10th time they're wishing they didn't have to set the table, but it's a rite of passage, right? The age that they can begin to earn a little bit of their own money by maybe mowing a lawn or by babysitting for another family, that's another age type ladder rung.
Yeah.
So we want to establish within our families and within our communities a ladder to adulthood. Well, I think we want to thank you for being a part of this episode of Heart to Heart Collaborations. We've got a couple of more episodes where we're going to continue to discuss Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And the reason we're spending this amount of time is because we're really passionate. We really believe that this is important information that needs to be out there for us, for our friends, for our families, for our community. And it's about exploring the ideas, right?
Right.
You're not going to take every idea that Jonathan Haidt presents or every stat that he presents and run with it, but you're being exposed to it, and then you can decide what to do with it on your own as far as in your own personal life or, the life of your family and community. And so we'd love for you to be a part of this book study as we continue to discuss. And then as we continue our podcast and move away from Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, we'll be getting into all those great things about wellness, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, and coming up on May 16th, 2025, we will be celebrating the end of the Anxious Generation book study with an in-person, a call to action event
Yeah.
in Farmers Branch, where we guide individuals, parents, and community members in assessing their individual and family digital usage and making plans for future change.
And one of the reasons I'm excited about this event, and really, I think we had a conviction to do this. I think we felt like we had an obligation and a motivation to get this information out to parents. But it's one thing to read the book on your own and still be fighting against, in a sense, the norm in your family or society or neighborhood or school or all those kinds of things. And so the goal is on May 16th, 2025, we'll be meeting in Farmers Branch at a place called The Meeting Place. And we want you to come. We want you to register, to bring your friends. And during that time, you'll be really analyzing, but also kind of recruiting your friends to do it with you.
Yeah, building a community. I think it's so important to get your friends involved and
Yeah, your tribe, right?
yeah.
So we look forward to collaborating with you on this journey. We hope that you will embrace your curious and open heart for yourself and for others.
Own your wellness.
Elevate your life. The content presented in this episode or any others should not be considered therapy and is not prescriptive. If you have questions or concerns about mental health, contact your primary care physician or local mental health provider. The opinions expressed are solely ours and are not representative of our employers or coworkers.